I'm running 5th edition with some Witcher supplements. The party is full of Witchers, but one player wants to be a Tabaxi. I tell her there are unfortunately no Tabaxi in the Witcher universe. She tries to convince me to just write it in, so I ask if she's willing to be a Witcher who responded to the mutation and aesthetically became a Tabaxi. She tells me that the racial history is important. I tell her I'm not going to add an entire new race to the game with all the history. She asks if I even want her to play. I tell her, of course I wanted to play. She then says she won't play a boring race. I tell her, you'll be okay. She leaves, and she tells my husband it seems like I didn't want her there in the first place. Damn, that sucks. The DM came up with a really creative solution on how to fit a Tabaxi-like species into the game. But of course, spoiled players are going to be spoiled. Players out there, remember, your DMs aren't robots. They have lives too. I thought I should begin this with a definition of what a Mary Sue is, which, according to Wiki, states a Mary Sue is a generic name for any fictional character who is so competent or perfect that this appears absurd, even in the context of the fictional setting. Mary Sues are often an author's idealized or flawless self-insertion. Now, the Mary Sue in this story started as the DM to a Roll20 campaign that I joined back in February, a month before Australia was forced to shut down because of COVID. I'd been playing D&D 5th edition for roughly a year and was in face-to-face groups, but we only played fortnightly, and I wanted a more regular game to fill my Dungeons & Dragons cravings. Roll20 seemed like a good place to look. And that is where I found a campaign called Rise of the Shadows. It was a homebrew where the story was that this vast world where territories were aligned to elements, think Avatar with the land of fire, land of water, etc., were all being tormented by creatures called shadows, which were consuming people and turning them into more shadows. The party were 6 individuals tasked with figuring out how to stop the shadows, but they were also God-chosen, each favored by a god that represented a key element and who had invested a part of their being into their chosen so that they had the means of potentially stopping this shadowy threat. It sounded like a fun story, but what really sold it for me was that it was being run by an Australian DM. It has been challenging to find games that didn't clash with my time zone. I filled out an application and hoped for the best. So I was excited when I received a private message from the campaign's DM saying that they were considering my application, but that everyone they had accepted into their game had to be interviewed by them over a call on Discord. Being new to Roll20 and online D&D, this gave me pause. I also have diagnosed anxiety from previous trauma experienced in my childhood and early adult life, and private conversation with strangers, particularly when I cannot see them and so cannot read their body language, can be a trigger, but I really wanted to be a part of this game, and the excitement over being considered had me taking slow, deep breaths and committing to the interview. And it went well, despite my anxiousness. The DM, let's call her BooMeadow, was nice and explained her campaign to me, what characters were already in the party, etc. I'd pitched the idea of a high elf shadow sorceress who had been raised by devout worshippers of the campaign's goddess that represented darkness. She'd been sacrificed to the goddess to gain her favor, only to return to them with shadow magic, causing them to believe her to be favored by the goddess and something of a vessel of her will. They thought that the shadows were their goddess's doing, and had sent my character into the world to determine what their goddess's will was. BooMeadow said that she loved the idea, and that my character could fit in both Rise of Shadows and another campaign she was running in the same world but with a different party. However, that campaign was on a different night to Rise of Shadows and didn't work so well with my free time, so I stuck to the campaign I'd applied to. And I was dropped into the game as the party were dealing with a cult that also followed the Dark Goddess and sacrificed kids, though apparently that was for immortality rather than for the goddess's favor. I actually had fun for about 3 months. Those who were involved in the campaign liked to chat and be friendly outside the game, and they even brought me into their circle. One of them, who was BooMeadow's boyfriend, we'll call him Evil One, even invited me to his own campaign, which BooMeadow played in and encouraged me to join. It was simply called The Order. The premises of the game was that it was based around the Order of the Gauntlet, running a military school in Waterdeep, where players would be playing teenagers living out a high school life. Think Dungeons & Dragons Hogwarts, and houses were determined by a god that your character dedicated to, but were really about class, out of the short list of allowed choices that you want to be. I was sold on being a blood hunter after I was told that they were being homebrewed based on Witchers from the Witcher series and Grey Wardens from Dragon Age. I'm a fan of both, and they were unique in that they didn't follow any gods but had instead been drafted into the order for reasons I could explore in character. So I made a tiefling who had joined the blood hunters after her mother, who had been her only family, had been turned into a vampire and was out somewhere in the world hurting people. She did not want to hunt and kill monsters per se, just the monster that her mother had become. I meant to play her to be a cynical loner because I thought that suited her outcast witcher vibe that I had been told were blood hunters in the setting. This, however, would be what would unmask BooMeadow as the overly controlling and downright mean person that she is, and how toxic her circle also is. For you see, I had not known that every few months the Rise to Shadows would lose a player, and then advertise for a replacement, or that it was basically the same for the Order. And I did not know that Evil One had put together his campaign where everything, and I mean everything, revolved around BooMeadow's character. Corellin Jesus, her character was dubbed because she was a half-elf, leggy blonde, whose elven side of her family were the second most influential noble house in Evermeet, and her grandmother was the elven ambassador within Waterdeep. Her mother was also head of the Order's supernatural department, whilst her human father was basically the mountain of Game of Thrones, but nice, after being experimented on to make him superhuman. So, also X-Men. Basically, if the mountain was part of the X-Men, and also had a heart of gold. And ever since she was a child, the elven god, Corellin, had been visiting and speaking to her, but nobody else can hear or see him, and he made her his chosen, so she was a celestial warlock, and the only warlock allowed in the Order, for the other magical classes were restricted to bard, cleric, or bladesinger. She was top of her class and popular, and her stats were by far the best in the party. A 20 in charisma, 17 in intelligence and constitution, a 15 in wisdom, despite only being a level 1 character. Oh boy, this is gonna be good. She was constantly denouncing the head of the Order as the campaign's big bad, despite there being no in-game evidence to prove it, but there were never any consequences for her doing this because diplomatic immunity and her being popular? This is our story's Mary Sue. And due to her character being a Mary Sue, BooMeadow did not like how I stuck to my blood hunter being a cynical loner. She complained that after my first game in Evil One's campaign, my character had not accepted her smile rock? It was a rock that her character drew smiles on and handed it out to new people to state that they were friends now, and sulked when my reply was that the rock wasn't exactly useful, and so my character would rather not keep it. And continued to sulk when they still weren't BFFs by the end of the second game. However, my character at the time was not the only one resisting her Mary Sue charms. Another player, who was also in BooMeadow's own campaign, had been playing longer than me, and was a lot more vocal in having his character disagree with her character. BooMeadow's Mary Sue had recently been promoted to leader over the party when the Order had us leave the school for missions, and when the Mary Sue would bark, "Do this!" the other players would reply, "Why?" Mary Sue would return with, "Because I'm the leader, and so that gives me authority over you," to which the other players would more or less respond with, "Not with that attitude," and BooMeadow would become visibly frustrated both in character and on a personal level that events were not going exactly her way. She began to complain about this rebellious player to those of us in Evil One's game and those of us who were a part of her campaign, insisting that he was being mean to her through her character. And, seeing as this player did not join out-of-game Discord conversations, he couldn't say she was wrong, and after a month since he had joined, the player was kicked from both campaigns. This didn't sit well with me. When I asked Evil One what had happened, I was told that this rebellious player wasn't coping well with being in lockdown from COVID. It was badly affecting his autism, which this rebel had never confided in me, and he'd stopped communicating with them, so he and BooMeadow had no choice but to drop him from their games. In hindsight, I should have listened to that uncomfortable feeling in my gut, but I did not, just as I still had not made my blood hunter be part of Mary Sue's idolizing friend group, and BooMeadow's frustration was now aimed solely at me. She began to argue with me about decisions that I had made in-game the moment the session was over. for sometimes over an hour, and if I had done something in-game that caused any sort of drama, she would go on to tell and constantly remind those in her own game about it, to the point if there was ever a moment where something didn't go according to plan both in her game or in a player's daily life, she would refer to said mess-ups by my character's name. I did catch her after telling the Discord chat group that I needed to leave to do something, but only muting myself. While I was quote-unquote gone, she was telling the group how awful of a character my Bloodhunter was, that I was ruining the game, and that if I didn't change, I'd have to leave. Now, at this point, my anxiety was being triggered by her behavior, not to the point where it was unimaginable, but I was beginning to dread the nights where I was to play my Bloodhunter, and I was beginning to hate her because of how stressed I was feeling. And I never want to be the reason that a party falls apart, so I privately messaged BooMeadow, telling her that I'd overheard what she said, and that if she really did hate my Bloodhunter, that I was willing to play someone else. She was quick to try and tell me that I had misunderstood her, and that she didn't really hate my character at all, but I didn't buy it, so I messaged Evil One instead, suggesting it would probably be best if I made a new character. He told me no. He told me that he liked how I was playing my Bloodhunter, and he was sure that BooMeadow hadn't meant it, and was just overly stressed from one of her other campaigns, that he was going to give her a warning, and that I should not have to worry about it. Unfortunately, BooMeadow didn't appreciate that warning, and likely realizing that if she couldn't kick me out from her boyfriend's game, she had the power to make me suffer in her game. The first thing she did was tell me that my character was no longer from a church that practiced child sacrifice, but from a normal, ethical, practicing church, and that there had been nothing remarkable about my character at all. She had just convinced herself otherwise, and that the church hadn't been able to convince her that she was delusional. The second thing that she did was have my character meet the dark goddess that she was now deemed obsessed with, something that I had first been excited about, as my character was the only member of the party who hadn't yet met any of the gods, and I thought it would make for a great entertaining conversation and scene. There was no conversation though. My character was separated from the party where this goddess essentially attacked her, and I wasn't allowed to roll any dice to try and protect myself. Essentially, I was told that this god reached into your chest and took away your power. Oh, and I was no longer playing a level 9 Shadow Sorceress. I had no class nor any levels for 3 whole sessions. Then I was told that I could choose a new class, but only from a class that another member of the party was already playing. I chose Monk, believing I could redo my stats and have the opportunity to do some fun plot stuff with Evil One's character, who was the party's monk. Only, no, I was not allowed to redo my stats. I also was not returned to being a level 9 character. I had to learn how to be a monk with sorcerer stats, starting from level 1 again, in a campaign where everyone else were now level 10. And then I was told in the next session that our party had upset the characters in her other campaign that were being run in this game's world and time frame, and that their level 10 chaotic aligned druid, cleric, and fighter were specifically coming for my character. That anxiety that had been triggered by BooMeadow and her Mary Sue was now not manageable, as all of the above was happening whilst BooMeadow was starting to shun me in the Discord group chat and through her Mary Sue in the Order campaign. I was spending days being unable to leave my house because my thoughts were fixated on what was happening in this damn game, how there was little my character could do about it and was probably going to die, how I must be really bad at playing D&D, and how this was being done by somebody who I thought was my friend, whilst others who I also thought were my friends looked on. I was having trouble sleeping and was medicating myself just to get some sleep. I knew that none of that was good, so I approached BooMeadow and asked if I could just miss just one session, because I was feeling anxious. She wanted to know why I was feeling anxious, so I told her. I thought that as my friend, she would understand and give me a break, which was what I was asking for. Instead, she told me that clearly her game was not for me, and that I should look for a new campaign. I then got privately messaged by Evil One, who proceeded to chew me out for stressing out BooMeadow. She had told him everything that I had said to her. He said that the problem was with me, and that I was being problematic with my characters by being inflexible and not showing enough emotion with my characters, and I was making people uncomfortable, and that I clearly had a problem with BooMeadow's game because I did not ask for a break from his game, and that maybe D&D in general wasn't for me. This had really upset me, and whilst I could have walked away, and I should have, I didn't want to. I still loved the stories that they had both crafted, and I wanted to believe that they were still my friends. So I begged Evil One to allow me to stay in his campaign. I again said I was anxious and struggling with my anxiety, and that it was probably my anxiety that was making me exaggerate things, and that I was sorry for stressing out BooMeadow. He pressed me to explain more to him about my anxiety, and I unhappily confided in him about my earlier mentioned trauma. His response was to tell me that we're all broken, but that I still needed to step away from the game. If I agreed not to play any D&D for 2 weeks and make it a new character for his campaign, he'd talk to his girlfriend and see if I could return to their campaigns. BooMeadow messaged me later that night saying the Evil One had told her what he told me, and that she'd given me 2 weeks as well. So I did as I said I would, and the only thing D&D related that I did was to continue to talk in the Discord chat, though BooMeadow and a few others continued to act coldly towards me. And then after the first week was done, Evil One messaged me privately. At first, he just asked me how I was doing, but eventually he told me that I was out of BooMeadow's game, despite her telling me that I could come back after the second week. It was a decision that she could not tell me herself. She was too stressed out by it, as others within her game had told her that they did not like my character or how I was playing the game and wanted me gone. But Evil One reassured me that he did not feel that way, so I could come back to his game in a week. He told me to use my character to prove to them I'm not a bad player. It hurt. It was like confirmation that I had not been over-exaggerating BooMeadow's behavior, but it also meant that some of those who I had been talking to almost daily for months and thought were my friends weren't. But Evil One was still my friend, I told myself, and him letting me stay in his game was enough. Also, he told me that he had created a second campaign in the World of the Order, but that focused on a school in Neverwinter, that he had moved the Mary Sue to temporarily, to make everyone feel comfortable. So I made a new character, a half-elf cleric of the light domain, and I tried hard to make him as different from my blood hunter as humanly possible. I gave him a wholesome family where he was just an untested student of the Order, eager and hoping to prove himself, and prepared to play without the Mary Sue, though BooMeadow still turned up for the session to listen in. I thought the first game went well, but I was still anxious, now pretty much convinced that I'm not as competent as a D&D player as I thought I was. So I asked Evil One how he thought that it went, and if there's anything I need to change in regards to my new character. Unfortunately, his response roughly summed up to, "It was different, but it's still early, so don't worry about that right now." And in hindsight, after a second game, I know his reply was essentially BS, as the day after that game, he told me over Discord he was kicking me out. I asked him if I had done anything wrong, and he told me that was not it. Apparently my character just was not liked, but he admitted it was because no one was willing to give him a chance after my blood hunter, and that BooMeadow felt that things were awkward between her and that I must feel that way too based on how I was playing the night before. 2 players had said that they didn't want to play so long as I was part of the game, and so he was going to drop the order entirely after I was gone and focus on the new Neverwinter campaign he'd made for his girlfriend. He and BooMeadow would then block me from viewing their campaigns on Roll20 and had me leave the group Discord as well. This happened a few days ago, and recounting exactly how I ended up here, and toxicity, leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I don't want to give up on D&D over this, but this experience has definitely left me feeling insecure. Holy hell, that is about as manipulative as things get. Gaslighting is the word of the day, ladies and gentlemen, because that is definitely what these guys are doing. Convincing this poor fellow that they are not good at the game, that they're toxic, that they're ruining the experience for everyone else. Now, of course, that kind of self-introspection, that is necessary, because when an entire group of people is telling you that you're ruining the experience for everyone, you might need to consider that you need to change some things. However, what really exposes the fact that this is gaslighting is that the OP does try to change, and nothing comes of it. Another good old-fashioned red flag is the back talking. If someone is really certain that you're doing something wrong, they don't shit-talk you behind your back. They say it to your face. And if you are doing something wrong and they don't say it to your face, then they are the problem too. During my podcast with Momo O'Brien, she mentioned that some LARP groups can get into really mid-somer territories, and this story makes me think that D&D games can get into those territories as well. Damn, that really was something. If you guys enjoyed this episode of RPG Horror Stories and want to let me know, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then please do subscribe to Crispy's Tavern. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment gaslit to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.